Hola, ¿qué tal? Un gusto saludarles. Omar Mora desde PQ Systems. Hoy no estamos en BlackberryCross, estamos acá en Dayton, Ohio, y estamos justamente en la casa de PQ Systems, y el día de hoy tenemos a un buen amigo que es Steve. Así que vamos a hacer un cambio de español a inglés a partir de este momento. Y Steve, what I was saying is, I was introducing to the audience, saying in Spanish that we are here at PQ Systems, and we're very happy to be here, that we are here with you, and thank you for your time. But maybe you can let our friends in Costa Rica, in Central America, the rest of Latin America, who you are, what you do here at PQ Systems.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for visiting us here in Dayton.
Thanks, Steve.
And my name is Steve. I work in software development here at PQ Systems. I have worked in this role for way longer than I care to admit. I have been here for over 30 years.
Wow.
And so I have seen a lot of software be developed through that time. And my role is mainly to coordinate the software development activities and to do planning about our future work and things like that.
That's awesome. So more than 30 years, or 30 years over,
Yes.
Close to 30 years. That's awesome. And I know because I use and I've been getting familiar with PQ System products for many years now, since 2008 to be exact. I know that SQC Pack and EngagePack, those are great products, but it's my humble understanding that you have a great software product because you have a great software development process. And yesterday, Caroline and I, we were invited to one of your meetings that is a Kanban meeting.
Yes.
And in which you meet with some people at the company, your software development team, and you talk about the development process you're doing for the products that we were talking about, SQC Pack, HPAC, and some other ideas. What can you tell us about that process, about the development process you have been working on for years?
Okay, so over the years we've had many different development processes.
Okay.
In the early days it was somewhat random, and it was just code as fast as possible and ship as soon as we can.
Okay.
And there were obvious problems with that approach, but the demand was high and the resources were low, and so we did what we could. So we became more formalized in the way we develop software over the years, and we've tried different processes, including what some people call the waterfall development model, or the software development life cycle. And each time we do this for a few years, and then we evaluate, how the process is working and decide if we want to use a new process. So about 2 years ago, we started on more of a Kanban process. And in this process, instead of focusing on completing a process or a project that may take several months, we look more at what's our flow through the system. Okay. So how much work are we doing? We know that we're going to be developing software for many months. So rather than say we're going to finish this project in 2 years, we look at what work are we doing in smaller chunks. Okay. And so we chose a 2-week sprint. So every 2 weeks we evaluate what we're doing, and we look at how much work has flowed through the system in that 2-week period. And all of the work is managed on cards on a kanban board. And so we look at metrics such as how many cards did we complete this week, how many cards did we add to the board, and how many cards moved in the process from one state to another. So the life cycle of a card is basically, it starts in the backlog. Okay. So we have a request from a customer, or we find something we can improve in the software, we write a card for that.
Okay.
And a card is like a small story that says what's the problem and how do we plan to solve it.
Okay.
So we add those to the backlog.
Okay.
Then they get evaluated for how much value will this provide to the customer. And they also get evaluated by how difficult this is as an engineering problem. And over time, the stakeholders, these are people that have an interest in what we do with the software,
Sure.
which include our owners and our managers, but also customers. So customers are stakeholders in what we decide to develop next. So we evaluate the cards, and then a team of stakeholders prioritizes them.
Okay.
And so we may have 100 cards in the backlog, but at any given time, maybe only 20 are candidates for new work.
Oh, I
So
see.
when we finish a card and we have more capacity, we take a new card and move it into in process. And there are several steps it goes through before we ship it or deploy it with the software.
That's very interesting. So it's not only having a lot of work to do, a lot of stories to complete, but also having into account a very important element you mentioned is customer is always a stakeholder in this process,
Right.
and managers and some other stakeholders give you priorities. They help you prioritize those cards in the flow.
That's correct. In recent years, we've really given the customer more priority in establishing what's valuable to them. Even the way we write our stories, we try to frame them in a customer point of view. So we might say, as a gauge calibration technician, I have trouble finding a gauge when it comes due for calibration. Therefore, I want a new search feature to make that easier.
Okay.
So that's the story. That's what will be on the card, and it's from the point of view of the customer.
It's in his or her language,
Right.
and not our technical engineering and software development language.
Right. We in the past tended to write things like, we have to provide something on the internet, or we need to support the Apple Macintosh, or all these technical details that in the end a customer doesn't really care about. They want to do their job, and they want to get value out of the software by using it. And so we try to, every time we can, write the story from the customer perspective. There are times when we can't do that. So if we have a performance issue, things are slow coming from the database, we may have to write a card that has more engineering stuff on it, but we try when we can to frame it from the point of view of the customer.
That's very interesting and very, I think, very useful for the guys and the friends that are listening to us today, or any day they can access this resource, because it is not a theoretical aspect of how to make great products. The customer has to be in the equation, right? So that's very interesting. But another element that I really liked yesterday, thanks to your invitation to the meeting, was looking at, you already mentioned that, you mentioned that the metrics you have developed, but I know I saw those metrics, but also you were using, of course, our software here at BQ Systems. You were using SQC Pack, right? And I saw you mentioned it now, and I saw yesterday metrics like the number of cards you develop, but it's not only a number, a static number, but you do a control chart and things like that. So tell us a little bit more about it, because I think that it's not very common in all software development process to combine the use of the metrics with a statistical analysis like the one SQC Pack can provide.
Right. So with statistical process control, you try to look at a process and understand the sources of variation. So let's say you do a software development project and you're late. It comes out late. Okay, that's just a single data point. The project was late, but it may have come from months of work. So instead of waiting until the end to do an evaluation of, were we late, is the product good for the customer, things like that, we try to do that all along the way. And we try to detect the variation. So we use our control charts, and we look at things like number of cards completed per sprint. And if that drops drastically, or we see an out of control point on the control chart, a trend of points going down, or even a trend of points going up, then at the 2-week sprint review, we look at that and we think about, what are some of the causes for that? What are some of the reasons? For example, if we see things going up, that's a good thing. We want to be able to repeat that in the future so that we push more cards through the flow of the system in each sprint.
Yeah.
So we do use our statistical process control charts, and we have many metrics that we looked at. At the meeting yesterday, I think we had 4 different metrics, but we also keep track of some other ones internally, and depending on the sprint review and the phase of the project, we might look at other metrics. So we have metrics such as build failures. So every night we build the software, it's continuous integration. And if the build fails because there's an error in the code, we track that. Some other things we keep track of, we have a test system that's quite extensive. So if we make changes today in the code, tonight 600 chart images will be generated automatically, and they will be compared to the images that we have. We call them baselines.
Okay.
And if they are different, a list will be emailed to us in the morning of the differences. So we made some changes today, and guess what? The control limits are different. Well, that's not a good thing. So we track that kind of thing also. So we don't always put up all metrics in the sprint review, but depending on context, we look at quite a few metrics.
Yeah, I understand. So you're telling us that in order to maybe let our friends have ideas about how to use this approach. So please help me to summarize and correct me if I'm wrong, but one thing is it is important to have a software development process, and if you're using Kanban or sprints, kanban-boards, that's great. But you're generating data out of that. So and during your development process, you do testing, you do some integration of the software. Maybe not all customers do it daily, but when you do it, those processes generate data, and you can do more than just collecting a number, and that you can understand variability. And a way to understand variability is using statistical process control.
It's a very useful tool in many industries, and we found it to be just as useful in software development as it might be in manufacturing, where you're making brake pads or clutch cylinders or something like that.
Kind of a paradigm, I guess, in that sense, because most of our manufacturing fellows are very used to, the concept of country charts, and they study during college and different areas, but maybe in software development is not that the case. So looking at those charts yesterday, it was very interesting and refreshing, trying to understand how other customers can merge those Kanban practices with metrics. Could you give us, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 examples of metrics that are basic for a Kanban process, so maybe customers can emulate them or try to start downloading maybe a specific demo and start using it?
Right. So if you're doing a software development process yourself and you want to study the variation over time, I think it's important for Kanban or Kanban to look at the flow. So I would say an important metric right away is how many cards did we complete?
Completion rate.
In a time frame. It might be a 2-week sprint, it might be a 4-week sprint, depending on how you organize your software development team.
Okay.
But that's an important metric. Now, when you write up a card, it's important to manage the scope of what you put on the card. So if you write a card that says, create a new product for design of experiments, that scope is too big.
Oh yeah.
You're not going to finish that in a short enough time to get a metric out of it. So instead you have to break that down into many smaller cards, like design the database, decide which statistical methods you're going to use. Just that decision is a card.
Mm-hmm.
And so you push these cards through, and then you start looking at that on a control chart, and it'll give you an idea of your velocity. What's your team's capacity to complete cards? And that should improve over time if you study it.
Of course. And it's very interesting. So we were yesterday just brainstorming about the idea to share some of those examples of metrics maybe in the future with our friends, our customers. So we will follow that on that, and maybe on PQ Systems community or on the blog maybe in the future. So we buy that from now. So keep posted. We're going to keep you posted. But maybe in the future you'll see some of these examples that Steve is sharing with us.
So there's a saying here about, so we're developing SPC software,
okay,
but we're also using it. So we say we're eating our own dog food.
Yeah, that's a very I would say American English expression. Let's say that we understand. Let me try to translate that a little bit in Spanish, right? So una de las expresiones que se usa muchas veces en inglés es cuando uno usa lo que realmente produce o está manufacturando o en este caso desarrollando. Tiene que, al usar, ¿verdad?, su propia tecnología, decimos que estamos comiéndonos nuestra propia comida, la propia comida del perro, por así decirlo. Así que es muy importante para nosotros que ustedes vean que cuando estamos desarrollando software como SQC Pack o Gauge Pack, el equipo de desarrollo utiliza estos mismos productos para poder administrar ese proceso. So Steve, back to this conversation, and thank you very much again. But one final point here. I've been told you are scuba diving, and you are now invited to visit Costa Rica for scuba diving with some other PQ Systems fellows that I understand are also scuba divers. But if you had to make a comparison between scuba diving and all this experience in software development that is a sea of knowledge and experiences, and what are things in common, or?
Well, scuba diving can be very relaxing, and it can be recreational, and it can be fun. But you can't just do it. You have to put some thinking into where will you dive, and how deep will you go, and how will you get back, and is there a current? So there's a lot of thinking that has to go into having an enjoyable scuba diving adventure. And software development's the same way. You can't just start writing code. You have to have a process. You have to think about, what you're going to do along the way. And processes like Kanban and statistical process control can be really helpful.
That's very interesting. Yes, it is interesting. Most people that are starting in this software development world, sometimes they just want to jump in and start doing a lot of stuff. So it's nothing that you can do like that. So you don't see it that way. So it has to be some planning process before. That's what I understand.
I think that's true, but I want to be careful not to discourage the startup mentality, because if you start a software business, it's important that you get customers as soon as you can.
Yeah, sure.
So we were very fortunate when our company started. There was demand for, people had nothing. I mean, PCs were just coming out. So we were very fortunate that almost anything we produced, people would use if it had some value. Today, it's quite different, but there's still opportunity. So, if you're a startup, I'm not saying to spend 3 years planning. You have to define something that will provide value to the customer and get something in the customer's hands as soon as possible. Now, along the way, you might pay attention to how much work you're getting done every week, things like that. But so I want to be careful and not say that you want to be too bureaucratic and slow, especially for a newer business.
That's great advice. So again, so thank you very much for your time. We are so happy to be here in Dayton, Ohio, the home of PQ Systems, and we really appreciate all the things that you have done for us in terms of letting us know about the products, about the software development, and we know we always can keep learning from your experience and all the knowledge your team and you put into the process. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for visiting, and
thanks.
Thank you for being our representative in Costa Rica.
My pleasure.
It's good to have you here, and good luck to you.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, thank you very much. Bye, guys. So thank you very much. Muchas gracias a todos por estar con nosotros. Omar Mora acá desde PQ Systems. Muchas gracias a Lee, a Carolina, a Mark y a todos los que nos han ayudado a coordinar el día de hoy esta entrevista con Steve. Por favor, recuerden que va a estar disponible en la comunidad de PQ Systems, que es un website que tiene PQ Systems, una comunidad que se ha construido probablemente en el blog de PQ Systems también, y sin duda alguna en los recursos de BlackberryCross en i4is.blackberrycross.com, que ustedes saben que es el canal que va a estar por ahí, así como en SoundCloud y en otras plataformas en las cuales compartimos este contenido. Muchas gracias y hasta la próxima. Que estén muy bien.